Welcome back, everyone. Our final session of this year's Tokyo Global Dialogue is the United States in Transition, Choices for Japan and the World. The moderator is Professor Kaoru Iokibe of the University of Tokyo. Professor Iokibe, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon session. The session is titled The United States in Transition, Choices for Japan and the World. And well, those four distinguished panelists don't need introduction, but maybe I need some introduction. I am teaching at the University of Tokyo, Japanese political and diplomatic history. So basically, I'm a historian, but also interested in current issues. And as the main title is the United States in Transition, can we start with the United States? And to set the tone for discussion about the United States, let me give you a brief overview of this country. So I'm not good at metaphor, and I don't do this, but genuinely, I think the United States is it's a fascinating complexity, and it's like a spinning mirror ball. And once you are struck by the impression of one particular color of light, you can easily find yourself bewildered by the next. And this is why accurately grasping the shifts in America's orientation is a matter of vital importance, strategic importance for so many countries. And take the example of Japan. To Meiji Japan, United States was a kind of encouraging, a kind teacher. On the issues like revising the unequal treaties, the US urged Japan to break free from the European yoke. Yet, because the United States maintained its own distance from Europe, it would not step in to persuade Europe on Japan's behalf. Japan was naturally disappointed, but Japan accepted this isolationism and turning instead to European powers like Great Britain and Germany for cooperation. By that, Japan eventually succeeded in revising the treaties, regaining its sovereignty, and promulgating its constitution, Meiji Constitution. As we enter the 20th century, however, a renewed sense of bewilderment struck Japan as the United States began to deepen its interest and strengthen its commitment in Asia, showing strong sympathy toward China, a sympathy that the US would not be ready to show to Japan in the preceding century, while acting to check Japan's expansion. Japan attempted to adapt to this shift as well, but struggled to stabilize its relations with both the US and China. Ultimately, through the Second Sino-Japanese War and the Asia-Pacific War, Japan lost its empire. In the post-war era, America's posture alternated dizzyingly between an assertive, deeply engaged leader and a reluctant partner seeking to encourage burden sharing. And US aspect as an leader caused fear of entrapment on the side of Japan, while US aspect as a reluctant partner often caused the fear of abandonment on the side of Japan. And it has been an endless seesaw game where mitigating one fear only serves to amplify the other. The innovation of Trump administration in this regard was to simultaneously heighten both of these fears at once. Even when the fear of entrapment intensifies, allies and partners tend to choose to endure it out of an even greater dread of being abandoned and vice versa. And this innovation makes predicting the future even more difficult. So it is now more critical than ever to discern which reflections from the American mirror ball represent merely temporary flashes and which signify permanent structural shifts. So to rephrase my question, so how should we understand the transformation underway in the United States? And the current developments reflect a familiar historical cycle or a more fundamental century-scale shift in American societies. So let us start with Emmott sensei. Please share your observation with us.
Well, thank you very much, Iokibe sensei. Of course, you hit me with a hard task as the Englishman on the panel for two reasons. One, the United States just celebrated its 250th anniversary of its independence from Great Britain. And secondly, England was knocked out of the World Cup at 6 o'clock this morning. So I'm in a defensive position. But as the European on the panel, I would say that our observation is that it's very important to distinguish the short term from the long term. And there's a particular difficulty with the Trump administration in that, for two sort of reasons. One is because he is very noisy. He says so much. He makes dozens of Truth Social posts every morning. So there is a lot of noise relative to the underlying signal, even of his own plans. And secondly, this is an administration which unusually is very personal, the power is very directly concentrated in the president and operates according to very personal criteria. Of course, we Brits think of that rather ironically, since 250 years ago, the Republic was formed rejecting the king, and there is in the White House a man wanting to be king. So in the short term, Europe has big problems with Trump and America. We share, I would say, the analysis of Stephen Walt of Harvard University, which has labeled America under Trump as a predatory hegemon. Predatory, from a European point of view, is a new phenomenon. We've always seen America as a hegemon, as a dominant power, of course. But the fact that he is trying to capture Greenland from Denmark, the fact that we're victims of economic coercion on a regular basis, feels new. But probably we can, I think that we can adjust for that on the basis that a lot of that is personal characteristics. That he is, depending on which metaphor you want to use, he either behaves like a New York real estate person or like a mafia boss. He is a kind of mafioso style. I don't see any reason why I should think that kind of behavior is a long-term structural issue in America. It's very personal to him. The one thing in his policy that has concerned us in Europe has been times when it has looked as if the United States might be moving towards an alignment with Russia on the sort of basis that the great powers, the great nuclear powers of the world, Russia, China, and the United States, might have more in common than the United States has with the rest, with its old allies like Japan and Europe. So that is the times when we've been worried about a structural, a long-term change. But I think I would say that the evidence is not conclusive. There is not a real move in that direction. And therefore, I think that Europe is getting more relaxed in a way. We feel that we've gone past peak concern about the personal nature of this regime. So what would I focus on, just to conclude on, as the longer term things that I think we should be aware of in America from our observation of this administration? I think the main thing that we must recognize is that what the Trump administration and Trump personally has done is widen the range of possible behavior, so that we just have to expect an even less predictable America in the future, because he's widened the range of the possible. But also, it's a long-term fact that since the end of the Cold War, American foreign policy has been inevitably less consistent than it was during the Cold War. And I think that we can expect even more movement, more variation from administration to administration in terms of basic foreign policy objectives, so that we have to be prepared for that kind of long-term move. Second, I think that America remains a nation with global interests. There's no prospect of isolationism in the long term because of the global interests that America has. It's the central paradox of this administration that he is both protectionist and surrounded by billionaires who have made their fortunes from globalization. All the tech billionaires are quintessentially global business people. And so the global interests of the United States will remain constant. The US now clearly is much less willing to bear global burdens, to bear global burdens of public goods or of security. Wants burden sharing. That's not new to Trump. That's a long-term thing. I do think in future administrations, as in the past, allies will go in and out of fashion. There will be times when allies and partners are the focus, and other times where they're not. So I think we have to just accept that it's going to fluctuate. But within this, probably we should say that the United States, from a world point of view, cannot any longer be thought of as a fundamental anchor of our strategies, of the rule of law, of a certain way of thinking about the world. And the final point I'll end with is just to say that my questions about the future of America are less about the day-to-day movements of politics and personal behavior, and more about the long-term economic and technological strength of the United States. I'm an optimist about that prospect, but I do see in the SpaceX evaluation and the sort of bubble that's underway, some things that if you sit in Japan and think about a bubble that burst here, you have to get a bit worried about a technology bubble in the United States, and with the very high level of public debt, perhaps there's a shadow in the longer term over the American economy. I would still place my bets on it personally, but I think it's a question we should answer.
Before moving to Kubo Sensei, let me ask another question, a bit more fundamental, because you are editor-in-chief of The Economist, and also you make films yourself, so you're very keen on the culture and ideologies as well. So you said that Trump widened the range of possible behavior, and what's the outcome of that? Will it kind of improve our civilization or culture out of an excessive correctiveness? Does that the way you take it, or does that possibly dismantle the idea of rule of law or other infrastructure of a political or social life?
Well, I think what I was meaning then is that I think he has, in a way, represented a long American tradition of seeing America as exceptional, and in particular as exceptional to international law and international treaties. Those are for other countries, not for the United States. The United States is sovereign and does its own things. And I think that he has taken that approach even to a further extreme, but I don't think he's innovated in that approach. Where I think his personal behavior has widened the range of possibility is in that concentration of power and in some of the predatory behavior that we hadn't seen from the United States in a very long time, at least in history. And anyone who's looking at the future, looking at 4, 8, 12, 16 years ahead, should have to say, while Donald Trump individually is probably unique, some of the political characteristics that he shows could easily become electable again at some point in the future. So the range of electable characteristics, including an extreme predatory version of America First, we shouldn't rule them out.
I see, thank you very much. So Kubo Sensei is an America specialist and has been following a noisy personal person like Trump. So Kubo Sensei, what's your take from the US.
はい、どうも、ありがとう。
Thank you very much. I will discuss in the Japanese language. In 1975, I joined the university. From 1977, I have continuously followed and I have studied the United States as an undergraduate. And day after day, I am losing my understanding about the United States. And despite my lack of understanding, let me sort of speculate about the United States. First of all, the question, the long-term secular structural change of the U.S. In the political situation, there was the presidential election in 2016, and people who were awakened by the attractiveness of Trump, some noticed the attractiveness. Ohio, Pennsylvania, in the states, the white worker class people have noticed because the Democratic candidates were chosen in such states, but Mr. Trump's promise, in particular about the illegal migrants, he made a very strong commitment, and it was electrifying. It was like a lightning, and some of the voters were paralyzed, and they became fan of Trump in 2016. Some were disillusioned, and some went away by 2020. But then in 2024 election, these fans came back to Trump, and therefore the Democrats tried to take back these voters. They did work hard. However, the Democrats at this moment, they are highly educated bunch of people, and they were not able to take back those fans of Trump, and therefore there is the new political structure, and this could last quite long. And it's a similar perspective, the free trade agreement. Mr. Trump, when he appealed in 2016. There were two major campaign commitments, illegal migrants, and the other is the NAFTA and the TPP, which was under negotiation at the moment. Many of the white worker classes, they had a feeling about the migrants, and also with NAFTA, they felt that they want that to be discontinued because they're illegal migrants. If they come into the U.S., they are left, so block them from coming in or kick them out. And regarding NAFTA, and China is not related to NAFTA, but there were lots of factories going out of the United States, and they were desperate and they wanted to stop the outflow. And that was the appeal to the politicians. But the normal politicians and the journalists, they say that you have to skill yourself, you have to upskill, you have to train yourself, you have to study. They would only preach you. And the working white class thought that there was no politician who would listen. And then came Trump, and they thought that Trump completely understands, looks like understanding. They appeal, and Trump looked like talking the same language. So the issue like FTA, NAFTA, this was a major campaign issue. And originally, NAFTA was the Republican idea. And before Trump appeared, Republicans were free trader, and they were promoting FTAs. And NAFTA was also a proposal by Republic. But after the appearance of Trump, NAFTA, the people understood the attractiveness of protectionist, and a lot voted for Mr. Trump, and many Republican members also leaned towards protectionism. And as a result, the Democrats, Mr. Obama was rather an exception. The TPP was promoted. He was a rare case. But for the overall Democrat, they were traditionally rather protectionist or against the free trade. And therefore, both Democrats and Republicans, both of the major political parties, both are opposed to FTA. That is the structure as of today. Going forward, it seems unlikely to change, I feel. In addition, if I may, diversity, equity, inclusiveness, DEI, the liberal left intelligentsia, they had occupied the promotion of this in the Democrat. But with Mr. Trump, people realized that this could be challenged, that you can oppose DEI. And many conservatives got to know that they can say no. And therefore, DEI-related issues, and the liberals had occupied the issue. I might make it difficult for you to understand, but no one challenging it against the DEI. This situation, I expect to change, that this could be an issue that could be contested widely. And lastly, in terms of diplomacy, again, the white working class, I think, is also related here. The American diplomacy since 1945, the international order based on the rule of law was to be protected, and the U.S. did have the power to ensure that is kept. But that is the very area that Trump is criticizing. But to say it differently from other side, U.S. Was burdening everything, including military personnel, political burden, economic burden, everything U.S. shouldered in order to defend the international order. So that was altruistic in a certain sense. But precisely that is the area that Trump attacked. And regarding the predecessors, all predecessors were stupid. U.S. took on everything on its shoulder, and all the allies just exploited, and they are not thankful to the U.S., and U.S. just kept losing everything. And Trump said that he is going to fundamentally change everything. That is what Trump appealed. And that appeal was, I think, quite effective because many white working people looking at Trump looks like when interventionist diplomacy is taken by the U.S. What is the interest for yourself? If you think that question, it's nothing for me, naturally. That is the answer for the white worker. And therefore, this, I think, is part of the structural change occurring. However, but depending on the administration or depending on the president, if there is a will and intention, this could be reversed. The American public opinion is inward-looking, if you want to say so. Then in the 1970s, there was the Vietnam War, and they failed. There was a certain inward-looking, but then there was the Reagan administration, and the direction changed. So the leadership changed the direction. After the end of the Cold War, the public opinion of the U.S., I think, looked further inward. That has been pointed out. However, George W. Bush administration started to become more active in outward security-related diplomacy. And therefore, the fundamental direction, yes, is likely to go inward. However, depending on the administration, depending on the vision of the president of the time, or the persuasiveness or the belief in the principles, to a certain degree, the direction could change. That is how I feel. That is the structural change that I can discuss right now. I went too long.
Trump being electable is the fundamental phenomena we are facing, and according to Emmott sensei and Kubo sensei gives us an persuasive account how he became such electable. So Weinstein sensei, what's the fundamental background that made Trump electable, and what will be the long-term change going on in the U.S. With Trump or even after Trump?
Sure. Iokibe sensei, first, thank you very much for turning to me. I'm honored to be on this distinguished panel, honored to be back for the Tokyo Global Dialogue, and thank Ambassador Sasai and his colleagues at JIIA for a fascinating set of discussions. I think I'm going to begin first with history and then turn to President Trump to begin with. And let me simply start out by noting, ever since the American founding, U.S. strategic thinking has oscillated between sovereignty, isolationism, and restraint, which largely dominated through until World War I, and then idealist liberal internationalism, which we saw during World War I, obviously under President Wilson, post-World War II and the construction of the post-World War II order, the Marshall Plan, et cetera, the Cold War, and it really hit its apotheosis, I think, in the Iraq War, as Professor Kubo hinted at. And I think it's, my Hudson Institute colleague, Walter Russell Mead, talks about the four schools of American foreign policy. The Jeffersonian school, which is isolationist and sovereigntist. The Hamiltonian school, which is focused on promoting global commerce and trade as a means to help the republic flourish. And we obviously see the Hamiltonian instincts in the free trade policy that Bill Clinton picked up from the Republicans, and which was the big focus for his presidency, for George H.W. and George W. Bush's as well, for Reagan's as well. There's the Jacksonian strand, which is inward-looking, but willing to use force, massive force, when the United States is attacked or when our interests are attacked. There are these four schools, and obviously President Trump is rejecting Wilsonian internationalism in favor of something that looks a lot closer to Jacksonian foreign policy. Now, the current era marks a shift away from liberal internationalism towards greater realism as well, driven by great power rivalry, especially with China. But I think the big difference is with regards to alliances today, and it's Colin Dweck of George Mason University who points this out. We view alliances today as instruments of American power rather than as moral endeavors. And these were viewed as moral endeavors during the Cold War. When you read the great speeches of the Cold War, whether Truman's, whether Eisenhower's, Kennedy's, Reagan's, and the like, you do get this very deep moral sense about the importance of our of these alliances and just how deeply intertwined they are with our religious principles, with our founding principles. And realism doesn't necessarily have that moral content to it. But realism for the United States is different than from other powers because of our founding principles, which we can discuss later. But I should note, isolationism is not an option for the United States. We are a global power. We are the global hegemon. I don't believe that we are predatory. I think that's an unfair assessment. Period. We are a global supplier of goods and assurance of so many trade and the like. But our interests are global. We no longer view them as moral. And I think this was one of Trump's great sort of things. Trump has an ability to get to what Machiavelli called the effectual truth about politics. He is someone who cuts through the nonsense, cuts through the verbiage, the highfalutin rhetoric, and focuses on specific things. And it's his anti-establishment rhetoric in particular that allows him to make fun of the failures of the establishment in a way that appeals to these blue-collar workers, paradoxically. The Fifth Avenue billionaire who was able to appeal to blue-collar workers. And it is this notion of the failures of the establishment on trade, where we sent everything abroad to China to be manufactured, the failures of the establishment in trying to bring democracy to Iraq and Afghanistan, the failures of the establishment's willingness to give in to diversity, equity, and inclusion when it was leading to a system in our universities that was excluding merit, rejecting the importance of board scores and the like. I could go on. And I think Trump has brought this to U.S. foreign and defense policy in a way that no other president, certainly in our times, has. Now, this certainly can pose a challenge to our allies because the president, now every American president since Eisenhower complained vocally about our European allies not stepping up to meet their defense obligations. Robert Gates's farewell address when he stepped down as Barack Obama's Secretary of Defense was filled with this language. But Trump actually did something deeper, which is he acted like a restrainer. And he let our allies know, you are on the hook. And he told the Europeans, you're on the hook for Ukraine. It's not my responsibility. And fortunately, the Europeans listened and stepped up. And Ukraine is in a much stronger position today as a result. You in Japan have listened and picked up. And it was the strategic transformation of the culture here in Japan that began under Shinzo Abe, who originally, and those of us who knew him well, knew he was deeply disturbed by President Obama's unwillingness to enforce the red line in Syria that led him to realize the United States may not be a perfect guarantor of Japanese security. We're in the midst now of an extraordinary transformation here in Japan as well. And I think because the United States increasingly views allies as instrumental, and this is both on the left and on the right, I think it's critical for Japan and for America's allies to make sure that these alliances serve not only your interests, but ours. And bearing your fair share of the defense burden, which you're starting to do, embedding yourself more deeply in our tech defense dual-use stack, manufacturing defense equipment here close to the battle line, which could potentially be needed, as we've seen in Ukraine, and being prepared prepares us in the United States for the days that Japan will become a net defense producer, not a net defense consumer. And that will strengthen the alliance to a degree that really is extraordinary. And it is precisely that will bring the support of the white middle-class voters who paid the price in their minds, and I think rightly so, for much of our foreign policy and our trade policy over the years. These people will appreciate this and deeply stand by. What worries me in the United States, now I should note, there was obviously a significant continuity between the Biden administration and the Trump administration on things, except Donald Trump was never stupid enough to take sanctions off of Nord Stream 2, which gave the Russians a green light to go into Ukraine when President Putin understood that we were not going to stand there and stand by the Ukrainians at that precise moment. But I think, but other than that, there was significant continuity, not in rhetoric, but in actual policies between the Biden and Trump administration. At least from the Biden turn point, the differences were not as major as one might have expected. And I think as we go to the next administration, I think you will see deep continuities. No longer will our allies and partners be able to get away with low defense spending. No longer will our allies be able to engage in trade practices that we view as less fair than they ought to be. But what really worries me is not Donald Trump, not the Republican Party. The Republican Party, as Mike Green mentioned in the last panel, remains a panel that is tough on defense, big on national security. It's the left of the Democratic Party that really worries me. We are seeing the rise of the Democratic Socialists and the Democratic Party. These are people who they are not defense-oriented, they are not deterrence-oriented, they're much more friendly to China, they're much more friendly to America's adversaries. These are people who have imbibed the revisionist school of American history, which casts America not as a nation where all men are created equal and endowed by their creators with certain inalienable rights, but a nation of oppression, slavery, and land stolen from Native Americans. And they have, it is this school of thought that is increasingly prevalent in our history books, in elementary schools, in junior high schools, and high schools and colleges and universities, that is doing severe damage to our place on the global stage by teaching our students, our children, our grandchildren, our members of Congress that the United States is a force for evil that significantly undermines our alliances far more than anyone potentially ascribed to Donald Trump, who remains a defense-oriented leader who understands that he needs to take action and that the President of the United States has unique responsibilities in that way. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. One point to clarify. So you talk about an anti-establishment sentiment, and a significant part of Trump's behavioral policy can be explained from this perspective. And then when can US politics satisfy this sentiment? Maybe tariff policy might be a candidate, but now it's facing a need for a fundamental modification. So when, and that explains, how long this phenomena will last. So what's the point that we can say that this sentiment is satisfied and we can move on?
Look, I don't know when the anti-establishment instinct will end. I mean, I think the president came to an understanding. He always had deep skepticism of the establishment, going back to his days as a real estate developer, where he felt that the establishment real estate people were uncreative, didn't transform the landscape. Instead, they knew each other. They could benefit by knowing the regulations, but that they didn't improve New York City in any imaginable way. And I think Trump's view is that outsiders have a much deeper understanding. His view is that the establishment, which goes from the universities to our major media outlets, to our major law firms, to the public interest law, which takes public funding to promote left-wing causes, that there's a kind of corruption in the United States linked to these establishment views. The establishment is obviously trying to fight back. They have through lawfare against the president. But I don't see a point where the president will not be anti-establishment. I don't see a point where the Republican Party won't be anti-establishment. The Democratic Party is now the party of educated elites, the party of abstract doctrines about equity and inclusion, and the Republican Party is a party that is much more focused on the concerns of the working class.
Thank you very much. Now, Eto Sensei, please share your thoughts with us.
For this conversation, you mean the
The transition in the U.S. and as you're a famous China specialist,
Thank you.
Your account on the American, how this transition or change may affect American policy towards China or China's response.
Thank you.
Thanks.
私も日本語でお話
Allow me to speak in Japanese as well. I've been listening to the three panelists, and as Dr. Iokibe said, the United States is now in times of change. And how does China perceive this phenomena, and how are they trying to gain victory in this context? That's my first topic I would like to discuss. One question I receive when we are in discussion is as follows. G2 is mentioned by Trump, but is China seeking G2 world? And my answer to that question is as follows. Both US and China, neither of them are pursuing G2. Most likely, US is not assuming that it will be on par with China, so G1 world. But in order to control its relationship with G2, they're using the phrase G2. Maybe there's another G2 idea in the minds of President Trump. But then on the Chinese side, G2 concept is a world for two countries to govern one world. That's the definition. But China's thought is zone of influence of US and zone of influence of China, and both be at the top. In other words, China doesn't have any say in US sphere of influence, so they won't say anything about it. So don't try to intervene in our sphere of influence. That's the desire of China. Xi Jinping administration is trying to establish in the 10-year period of administration is to control the competition with the United States and make its fortress robust in its sphere of influence. And already they have a strategy leveraging economy in order to upgrade its influence. They feel there are four priorities, advantages. One is the size of the market. There is demographic bonus, and there's a larger middle class. So no one will deny that's an attraction. And second, manufacturing capability. This has already been mentioned, but China technologically wants to pursue more technically high level for manufacturing, and China's speed, pace of development. And they can implement the newly developed technology very quickly. So that is changing the Chinese society, and that included, it has competitiveness. And on top of that, the fourth leverage is narrative, which has become quite prominent in the Xi Jinping administration. And China, how do we interpret the profile being drawn by China itself? And China is using its description of China positively, and the profile of America used to be used as a very bad model until Trump administration.
Well, I think it can be said that this was quite accurate, but China was accurate in criticizing the problems of the U.S. society. 2021, centennial of the CPC, many reports were issued, but the human rights problem of the United States is deep. Me Too, Black Lives Matter was quoted. And also, drugs is a very deep problem in the United States. And in diplomacy, they are extraterritorially applying its own laws. So U.S. is exercising power very arrogantly and over the threshold that it should do as a power. They used to do that, but no longer are they making those criticisms publicly, and they're trying to lead amicable relationship with the Trump administration to buy time to control its contest with the U.S. competitiveness because they want to further deepen their power of influence. So those four leverages, especially technology, AI competition is intense between China and the United States, but the strategies are completely different. Functionality is focused in U.S., but general purpose is the focus of China. LLM is expanding, but in the future, embodied AI, physical AI will become more popular, and that's manufacturing capability times AI capability. So China has high level of manufacturing capability to begin with. So it already has an advantage in the future competition. So in the 3 years of the Trump administration, if they persevere and control its context with the United States, if they think about the benefits they can enjoy post-Trump, then it's worth playing that game. Then how is this being perceived by the surrounding countries? I've been participating in yesterday and today's session, and China shock was mentioned, and there had been debates on China on many aspects, and the concern was shared in principle, but I think there are differences in how we feel depending on the region. The voices of Southeast Asian and ROK, the structure hasn't changed. China has become stronger and pressure from China is bigger, but the relationship between their country and China hasn't changed structurally. That was a strong voice I heard. But on the other hand, Europeans, and this applies to Japanese participants as well, they said risk has risen. And how do we manage risk in order to continue our relationship with China? So amongst the advanced nations, that was the strong voice I heard. Then what about the United States? How does the U.S. Perceive China? That's my question to all of you. Please educate me, because we are receiving confusing messages. September 14th at the Sino-U.S. summit, what kind of debate will unfold? To what extent will proximity be achieved? And I think that the Chinese side vision is clearer than America. So how is the United States trying to respond? That's ambiguous. So the surrounding countries are saying that Americans are difficult to read. That's why they're saying that. But China makes it understandable because their core decisions are still in the black box and they're only clarifying their goals. So in terms of transparency, United States inherently has higher transparency, but by appearance, it's misunderstood that China is more transparent and clear in messaging. So in the Sino-China contest, what's the goal pursued by the United States? That's my question. Thank you.
As I'm not doing so well as a chair, now Eto-sensei is taking my role as a chair.
Yeah.
She's giving big questions to other three panelists, well versed in U.S. politics and diplomacy. So how the U.S. perceived China's rising challenges, as Eto-sensei described, and what's the policy and whether the vision of G2 really works or not. So can we start from Weinstein sensei and Kubo sensei and Emeritus sensei, this order?
Great, thank you. No, look, I think first, I think the president too wants to have a pause until the September summit on the relationship with China. He does not want, is especially concerned about losing rare earth and critical minerals, and does not want to pick a fight that will cause Xi Jinping directly to lose face. He doesn't mind undermining Xi on the international stage and, for example, overthrowing his best allies in both Iran and Venezuela, and getting rid of the Venezuela government, which was the top purchaser of Chinese arms in South America, a place where the Chinese had a satellite Earth ground station, and similarly with Iran, which had this agreement to sell below market oil to China in exchange for renminbi rather than dollars, in violation of sanctions law. But let me just sort of step back a bit. First I want to sort of talk about the more broadly. I think that this talk about China supplanting the United States economically, I think it's really overstated. China's economy, it is not transparent, and here I rely on my Hudson Institute colleague, Tom Duesterberg, former U.S. Commerce Assistant Secretary, who has really studied the Chinese economy structurally and notes the challenge of the collapsed property model, which is where so many Chinese had their savings, real estate revenues being an important part of revenues for local state governments. You have weak household consumption, debt dependence, demographic decline, and a reliance on subsidized manufactured exports. Now, if the United States were to spend 4% of GDP on subsidizing our manufacturing to send overseas, we'd certainly be able to take on the Chinese in every single sector they wanted to, but we don't. And the only way China is really promoting reporting growth, and we've seen the numbers the other day just were shockingly much lower than expected, has been by expanding exports and industrial production. But this creates trade frictions and may not be possible over the long term. So I'm sort of, and when I deal with Chinese, when I bump into them and my Chinese friends, I note immense despair from everyone in China I have dealt with in the last few years. University students can't get jobs. People feel there is no future in China, that the great hope of modernization and normalization is gone, and they don't know where the future is. And this, in turn, I think is going to lead to the need for greater political crackdown and greater uncertainty, a lot of which we're seeing now. Now, in the midst of the massive challenge that China finds itself in, China's blessed because it has a Harvard University professor named Graham Allison who has written a book talking about the Thucydides trap that first misunderstands Thucydides, and also I think misunderstands the relations between the two powers. And so the Thucydides trap argues that when a rising power threatens to displace an establishment power, war becomes almost a necessity. And Graham Allison borrows Thucydides' account of the Peloponnesian War, but talking about the fact that it was the rise of Athens and this fear that it inspired in Sparta that made the war inevitable. Now that's actually, now I don't speak Japanese. I do speak a whole bunch of other languages. One of the languages I studied in college was ancient Greek. And the word ananke doesn't mean inevitability in Thucydides that Graham Allison has. It's a psychological concept that can be dealt with by wise statesmanship. Thucydides never argued war was inevitable. And Thucydides didn't argue every power transition ends in war. And in fact, when you look at the great power transitions we have seen, whether it's the decline of Bill's beloved British Empire and Britain being supplanted by the United States, whether it's the fall of the Soviet Union, wars didn't result. And so, the approach overlooks other sources of war, nationalism, ideology, et cetera, nuclear weapons, economic interdependence. Bottom line is, but this is very useful language for China to use because the prestige of a Harvard professor is then attached to some notion that the Chinese have that they are our peers, which they are not, and they won't be for some time. And Xi Jinping's policy is going to delay that moment even further. So, and if I think a wise American policy would look at the sources of weakness in the Chinese economy and do what President Reagan did to the Soviet Union, which was to exploit those fissures to make current policies and current practices unsustainable. But we're not there yet, so.
Great, and thank you. And thank you also mentioning to the Thucydidean trap. Your remarks reminded me of the translation of Thucydidean work into English by Thomas Hobbes.
Of course, the great translation.
He did it during the Spanish Succession War, and he was against the war.
Yes.
And he didn't let it come out because there were hawkish people walking around the street. And when the war was finally over, he published it. So he was against the war, and he realized that fear is not what drives us, but fear is what we need to control. So I agree. Kubo-sensei.
No, well, can I just come in?
Please.
I want to defend Graham Allison a little bit again, my friend Graham Allison against my friend Ken Weinstein, because his book does not say that war is inevitable. It's a statistical analysis of what he sees, I mean, rightly or wrongly, we can debate as historians, cases in history where a rising power has confronted an established power, and looks at the proportion of occasions when war was a result. And the point of his book is to argue against war and to say, statistically, war is likelier than not, but we statesmen can do a lot about that and can prevent it. So I just want to defend Graham against that. I don't know whether he understood the Greek correctly or not. I'm not qualified to judge that. But I can see why it's convenient to Xi Jinping to use this argument, and there I'm absolutely aligned with Ken on that. He's claiming to be the unfair, the victim, as it were, of wrong American behavior. Now, just since I've stolen the floor from Kubo-sensei, I'll just add my quick view of it, of American policy towards China. I mean, first of all, I absolutely agree with Ken that there is now a correct perception in the United States, but also widely, that China's economy is in trouble and that China's power has peaked in economic terms, and that China has real problems. And one of those problems I'll just do a little parallel with, Japan. I remember in the 1980s, one of the bugbears was all of these American businessmen who would come here, and European businessmen, and say how brilliant Japanese bureaucrats were, that they knew all the solutions to every problem. And of course, that was proven not to be correct. And then with China, it was all the leaders of the Communist Party and the bureaucrats in China. And my question to anyone who says that now is, well, if Chinese leaders are so brilliant, why are so many of them in jail? Why are they? Why is the anti-corruption purge of Xi Jinping still going on 15 years after he began with no sign of slowing down? So I think there's real problems. Fundamentally, I think that the American view of China is that it is a competition, that there is, it is the pacing threat, but that it can be successfully confronted and deterred, but also beaten economically. I think I would agree with that perception.
Well, my panelists are making questions more than answers. That's a sign of the panel, probably. And we all respect Kubo-sensei because of not only his knowledge, but also his kindness and patience. So now Eto-sensei is actually interrupting. Please, Eto-sensei.
はい、ジャンプインさせてください。というのは月亭
Thucydides' trap. In the Sino-Japanese summit, it went beyond the Thucydides trap. The rejuvenating the China and America becoming great again. Let's do it together. So that's what he said. So from the Chinese perspective, American narrative is being used positively. So that's what they were trying to do from the positive perspective. Sorry, I don't want to raise the number of pending points, but Bill talked about why people are imprisoned one after another. I think that's the style of Chinese leadership. In the morning session, soft power was discussed. Chinese leadership is no longer pursuing. They haven't given up, but they aren't pursuing soft power. Rather, domestic power for them. They think that people will follow a strong nation. So by China becoming stronger, the peripheral countries will have no choice but obey to China. In other words, to make the world economy depend on China, then China's influence will be institutionalized and rooted and fixed. And I think that's the way they are going. So in order to be a strong leader, one after another, they penalize and continue to penalize because they don't want to show their weaknesses. So unfortunately, that's something that has to do with the style of leadership.
Is narrative still important? I mean, soft power is not important. Power matters. Then is narrative still important for China?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Can we continue talking about
Yes,
narrative? So
briefly.
Before I think it's better to go.
Okay. Sorry.
ファイナルになんかこうアメリカと中国と
US, China, UK, and between these powers, I have been sitting very quietly, almost like Japan. About Trump, how should I say the China policy? I mean, visit to Beijing, it was long decided, and just like attack on Iran, I should not handle them equally, but it was postponed. Initially, it was March. And why postponed? That's one issue. And also Iran and China and how those two issues are related. After visiting Beijing, and there's a plan for 3 meetings during this year. What is President Trump trying to achieve? Is there a clearly defined strategy? Is there a goal? I'm rather skeptic whether there is any clear goal. But for the time being, with the midterm election, that's not the only factor. But Trump's diplomacy, each time, oh, I've made so much money. Look at my huge achievement. Each time, on a short-term basis, he wants to flout that correction. He wants to boast that to the population. So I think it is part of his election endeavor. And of course, it is important for him to face China. But even if he's thinking in his heart, and sometimes his rhetoric out of his mouth might lack discipline, maybe, but about Taiwan and the export sales, arms sale to Taiwan, and then with President Xi Jinping, has there been a discussion in details? He had admitted after the summit meeting, because in terms of U.S.-Taiwan policy, he should not have clarified, but Mr. Trump went on to be very clear, and therefore it looked as if he had leaned to China. But on the other hand, I'm not sure if it has happened, but in the near future, with the President Lai Ching-te of Taiwan, that he is prepared to talk directly with President Lai. He has mentioned for U.S. President to directly talk with Taiwanese President again, vis-a-vis China. This is not acceptable. This should not happen. So maybe China might be worried if this is going to happen in true sense. So very difficult to interpret if the person is understanding very well, and if he is dramatically showing that, or if there is just a lack of discipline. That is unclear. And myself, it could be latter. I am rather suspicious that it is more latter, and that is a sense of concern for me. On the whole, in terms of China policy, how to deter militarily, or in terms of economic security, how to deter China, restrain China on the mid and longer term strategy. Does he have his own principle inside himself? That's unclear. And his comments about Taiwan, it's not that it's good if he just mentions it. In case of President Biden, for 3 or 4 times he said that he's going to go defend Taiwan, and that was retracted. So that is not exactly a good pattern. However, in the case of Mr. Trump, he says that 9,500 miles away is just so far away, Trump says. And he says that the semiconductor industry was taken away by Taiwan. He also says the implication looks like he's rather cold to Taiwan. He does not show closeness or sympathy or empathy. Those are the expressions Therefore, from Taiwan's perspective, it could be really shocking. From Japan's perspective, yes, Japan is also like 9,500 miles from the US. So, and Japan also might have stolen industry from the US. So that was an uncomfortable comment also for Japan. At the same time, if China does unify Taiwan, then it would be a president who lost to Taiwan, which means within the United States, he is going to be subject to major criticism. But then, having said that, regarding China and Taiwan, the long continuing battle or confrontation, if that should become prolonged, then it would go against the principle of America first. There would be suspicion. So there are lots of inconsistencies. Whether he is thinking about that in his brain and mind, again, I am suspicious it is not really organized in his mind. I still have that suspicion. China and the US, and after the summit meeting, my concern that arose is, and this is mainly about China, from President Xi's perspective, Mr. Trump, what does he want to achieve? It was so excessively obvious. President Xi understands what Trump wants, and on the Trump side, from President Xi's perspective, quite easy to manipulate, maybe. That is what President Xi might be thinking, easy to manipulate. Then, while Trump is in White House, for China, it is a chance, opportunity. If China takes it that way, then during Trump administration, China might venture for a bold action. I'm not sure. Of course, if the U.S. Carefully checks China, if a clear message signaled, that's another situation. But from President Xi Jinping's assessment of President Trump, and if I keep that in mind, that would be my concern.
Well, we've been talking about the United States and China, two giants, whether we call it G2 or not. And so let's put the growing assertiveness of the global South in our picture, and let's discuss what the coming new international order will be and how Japan should behave in this order. So from Emmott sensei.
Oh, thank you. Well, my first comment is that the name the Global South is a very bad name. It's not that I can come up with a better one, but it is a problematic name because what it is seeking to capture is what the Indian journalist Fareed Zakaria a long time ago in his book, The Post-American World, called the rise of the rest. And in a way, the Global South is just everyone else. And what the rise of it, and assertiveness reflects, is the benefits of globalization, in my view. In other words, the spread of economic development to a larger and larger number of countries, especially including ones in Southeast and South Asia that have very large populations, whether it's India, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Vietnam. These countries are growing faster than China. They are catching up in all sorts of dimensions, and they're gaining economic agency. They are more assertive because they are no longer feeling a need or a sense of dependency on any superpower. So that's what's different from the time of the non-aligned movement during the 1950s and 60s, which was a time when non-aligned countries were generally weak and often post-colonial countries, and they wanted to not be trapped by the superpower conflict, but equally they did not have much individual agency or influence. Now, the spread of economic development and therefore of markets and wealth and technological sophistication to more countries means that countries, either singly or in small groups, have more influence, have more agency. They don't have to be in anyone's camp. I think that they're a great stabilizing force in the world. I think that we should see this phenomenon as a stabilizing force. If we ask ourselves, why has none of the great shocks that we've talked about in recent years, the Ukraine war and the energy shock there, the Iran war this year and the energy shock there, even to some extent COVID shocks, some of the critical minerals scares, why have they not caused an economic disaster? The reason is because supply chains and markets have been able to adapt, because there are more places, more connections, more alternative sources now than there were in the past. So I think that the rise of the rest, maybe we should call them the global, because these are a lot more countries that have global reach and global connections. I think that they're generally a stabilizing force, but they're not going to be in anyone's camp, either individually or collectively. So, and I think America understands that, and perhaps an important question maybe to Professor Eto is whether China understands that. But I think that this development should be welcomed.
Eye-opening. Thank you. Kubo sensei.
はい、どうもありがとうございます。今度はちゃんと
Professor Kubo, thank you. Now we're in order in terms of the sequence of the interventions, but this may not be labeled as Global South countermeasure, but Japan, for a long period of time, has been upholding the international order based upon the rule of law since 1945. That's been the way of life. And Japan has been a model since 1945. And in a way, Japan will continue to implement and exercise that. And I think that's an important feature of Japan. And truly, most recently, there has been predatory action through raw power, war, and exercising of force being occurred. 1930s international politics, we've returned to the 1930s, some say. Of course, back then, Japanese way of life was very different, but I would object to that because today, this applies to Japan, but for many countries, and for most countries, EU countries, or closer to Japan, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and in principle, countries that uphold international order based upon the rule of law, those who had defended, those who will continue to defend, that's the attitude. And the number of such countries is not so small, and they may not be superpowers, unlike the United States or China, but in comparison to middle powers, they have more influence, maybe similar to major powers. And as a collection of those countries, then in terms of the degree of, say, political clout or economic prowess and technological power, then all put together in aggregated manner, they collectively would have quite big influence. So they could serve as the axis to uphold international order based on the rule of law, and maybe we can draw a picture on defending the international law based upon the rule of law by partnering with those countries. And to the extent it is possible for Japan to assist those countries, it would be possible to provide support. For example, to the Philippines, second-hand a frigate will be provided to the Philippines, and this is a part of our effort to gain more friends that would uphold international order based on the rule of law. And through JICA, ODA has been distributed to these countries, and we are now trying to provide assistance in the security area, and the Philippines project is through that OSA. And also, we will see more such examples being provided to countries such as Indonesia. So that kind of contribution can be made by Japan, and I think that's doable for Japan. And the U.S. U.S. today is not necessarily very kind to the Global South, maybe, and USAID, Agency for International Development, has been dismantled. And within the United States, there were probably certain conditions and reasons, but the Global South would take it that has shrank the soft power of the United States. But it doesn't guarantee that U.S. will remain today's U.S. forever, and we may see the older U.S. come back. So eventually, we may be able to do something together with the U.S.
And Eto sensei, and try to keep it as short as Emmott sensei and Kubo sensei.
Sure. Great. Look, first, I want to say, I think we've actually, the United States got rid of the U.S. Agencies for International Development. What have we seen since? We've seen 6 right-of-center governments elected in Latin America and Central America, favoring the United States, looking to the United States for guidance, wanting to engage with us, wanting to get China out of their minds, out of their economies to a certain degree. We've also seen an extraordinary effort in Central Asia, where the United States is deep in relations with both Armenia and Azerbaijan, with Belarus, Russia, with Kazakhstan and other nations, and it's passing unnoticed. Granted, some of that is the challenge of a declining Russia, but there's also a sense of China's rise. We saw President Trump meet with Hun Sen of Cambodia, a door that was partly opened by Japan. And so for all the criticisms of the public diplomacy, we've actually made serious headroads since the Trump administration came in the global South. Now, all that being said, and I'm as uncomfortable with the term as Bill is, Japan does have a unique role. We need to make sure that the global South looks to the West for economic engagement, for education, and for technology. And here, Japan, through FOIP, has really got a unique position as the trusted partner in Southeast Asia and a trusted partner in Africa. And Japan is definitely picking up a lot of the slack, undoubtedly. And I think that the shift towards defense assistance that Professor Kubo mentioned is also very welcomed, showing that there's real skin in the game. But I do think there's a chance for a populist fissure in the developing world where, and this is the challenge for European development policy, which, like American development policy, often came with strictures about gay rights and gender equality and all these sorts of things. And we need to be very careful about opposing abstract ideas from our universities on societies that may not take them well.
Eto sensei.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Professor Eto, thank you very much. With the countries in the global south, how does China regard them, and how does China approach those countries? It is not just on global south, but this is an issue which is shared by the other countries as well, like Japan or the United States. As a state, they're not really trusted, but economically they are very, very attractive. For example, China-made AI could be utilized, and the economic activities could be more efficient. Productivity will improve, and that is good for the government. But there is a labeling of it is China-made. Now, why China-made products are being chosen? It is because it is cheap. Even though the price is coming down in many ways, it will still be a cost. So if it is cheaper and the performance is as good as the other products, then they would be selected. And when you share those values, you can draw the line somewhere, and you could discuss this is where we will be using those AI, but for the other the fields, you will not use those AI. But in the countries of global south, they would not draw the line anyway. So the China-made AI, AI companies will become platformers. So for other countries, how to mobilize the global south for themselves should be discussed more.
So I'd like to open the floor. I'd like to invite your questions. And so identify yourself and identify to whom you are asking your question. And we already have 4 great panelists, so I don't need a 5th. So try to be brief. Make 1 question. If you're dying to make 2 questions, try to make them look like 1. So any of you.
Thank you so much. Such a excellent discussion. My question is going to Dr.
So you're Okudera-san?
Yeah. My name is Atsushi Okudera, the senior international correspondent with Asahi Shimbun. I want to ask, my questions goes to Dr. Weinstein and Kubo sensei. And I believe we have been talking about how the United States changed and itself. But I want to ask about the outlook of the future, and particularly after the midterm election. It is the case, if the Democrats get the majority of the House or probably Senate, and the President Trump, because given the approval rate of the President Trump is getting worse over the last couple of months, and if in that case, I want to ask your assessment, how the result of the midterm election affect the domestic, domestic issues, but at the same time the international order. Including the foreign policy. If the President, the Democrats get the majority, and after the midterm election. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Kubo sensei.
よろしいですか。はい。
First of all, if we view the situation in the House, the Democrats, maybe higher likelihood for them to gain majority, but the race is close. And in the Senate, Republicans were said to be the majority, but the Democrats are catching up, and there is a possibility. But the main Democratic candidates have withdrawn, and in Maine and in Texas, the Republican candidate is weaker. So there are many factors, and we can't read. And if Democrats win one or both houses, or both the Senate and the House, in research of the committees of the Justice Department, Epstein file is taken up in order to discredit the Trump administration. Maybe they may do that. That's one possibility. And in terms of foreign policy, the president has quite lots of freedom, not really bound by Congress. So there would not be any significant immediate impact, but military operation funding for Iran. There are many cases where congressional approval is necessary, and Mr. Trump has fired many cabinet ministers, and for the successor, there has to be Senate hearing and approval. So in personnel matters, if there are some problems in terms of congressional approvals, that could be a hiccup.
Yeah, no, I agree fully. The Democrats first will have massive hearings into all sorts of issues, DHS, Epstein, the president's wealth, his son's business dealings, et cetera, et cetera. And they'll also block even the confirmation of qualified nominees for offices. And this, having been there myself, it is not fun to sit around and wait for Congress to move on yourself. And it's going to pose a real challenge to governance. In addition, if the Democrats win the House, they will have a larger group of members of the House from the Democratic Socialists of America who will push a very hard line, very tough line on U.S. Foreign policy to weaken our arms buildup and to side in cases with our adversaries, including China. And this will, this will not be good for our nation. It will not be good for our allies. And but I also agree it's too early to tell. The difference now is our elections are not just on one day. They will begin around September because of absentee voting, which really got extended during COVID. And rather than having one day or a few days when everybody goes to the poll with a few absentee ballots, now you get your ballot very early. And so if, for example, the war in Iran winds down, the regime falls, oil prices drop rapidly, that may not turn up in the polls. Or if the reverse happens, that might not turn up. So it's too early to tell, but I don't think it's going to be good news for the nation if the Republicans lose majorities in either house, despite what the mainstream media may tell you folks here. including the Asahi Shimbun.
Okay, other questions? Yes, please.
My name is Shikata of Mitsui and Company Fellow. Let me ask one question to Mr. Weinstein. It seems to be that the isolationism in U.S. seems to be DNA of the United States starting from George Washington or his farewell address, don't get involved in European affairs, and the Monroe Doctrine, Nixon Doctrine, and so on. So whoever the next president may be, the United States continue to be national interest oriented rather than values oriented. At the same time, in the Pacific must share more than 50% of GDP from now on. So the United States will never ever any concession to China. So let's split the Pacific. Eastern part belong to USA, western part belong to China. I don't think it is going to happen. So Japan should enlarge CPTPP in cooperation with EU or other countries, including India or Indonesia in the long run, to enlarge FTA zone with keeping reserving a seat for USA. Someday in the future, the United States will come back to the free world in the future. That's what I expect. What do you think about that? Thank you.
I don't think we've ever left the free world. The Trump administration's main concerns about CPTPP, which the president looked at very seriously, were the domestic content provisions related to automobiles, which USTR Bob Lighthizer thought gave an opportunity for the Chinese to come in backdoor through Thailand and others because of domestic content provisions that weren't strong enough, but the administration certainly considered it. That's not the case today. TPP is not being considered. But the more that TPP, it's important the UK has joined TPP, the closer that TPP aligns itself with the positive aspects of Europe and the positive aspects of American allies, all the better. And that does, would not hold one's breath that we'll enter CPTPP at any point soon. Let me say on the isolationist point, Donald Trump is not an isolationist. Donald Trump is not a restrainer. This is a man who gets involved in the FIFA draft, the NFL draft, Venezuela, Iran. He is not an isolationist, and it's wrong. I mean, I know you didn't say he was, but he is someone who is very engaged, very much understands the instruments of American global power. But there are real isolationists who do worry me. And in that case, I would be genuinely worried if I were Japan. Donald Trump is not one of them.
Thank you. We still have time for floor discussion. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is John West from Australia. Thank you very much for the excellent panel. The impression I have from this conference is that the US economy is still strong. The Chinese economy is weakened. From Graham Allison point of view, you'd say this is good, that we're going to avoid the Thucydides trap. But there are many reasons why countries go to war, not just great power transitions. And some people even argue that a China with a weakening GDP is more likely to go to war over something than a China with a strong GDP. Does any of the panelists have comments on the risk of conflict in Asia from all sorts of reasons?
To whom you like to answer? Anyone?
Here, I'll say something. Oh, Kubo says it.
My answer is Chinese economy, regardless of whether it's weak or strong, China is dangerous.
I will soften that in the following way, in that I think we should ask ourselves whether Xi Jinping is a risk taker or is he risk averse. Certainly China can be dangerous, there's no question, I would agree. But I think that in terms of his strategic behavior, he's relatively risk averse. And the fortune for us in the world, perhaps, is that he's seen his strategic partner, Vladimir Putin, have a disastrous failure, humiliating failure in Ukraine, losing 1.4 million casualties for almost zero gain in territory, and really in a disastrous situation. And he's seen the difficulties, shall we call them, of even the most powerful military superpower to overcome Iran. So if you were Xi Jinping, would you decide to take a military risk? Now, would be my question. My answer is that he won't. And that anyway, if Taiwan is the source of danger, his much better strategy is to try to take over Taiwan from within by influencing Taiwanese politics, particularly targeting the 2028 presidential election there. Maybe if he fails with that, we can talk again.
We should definitely do it again. So you seem to have.
Okay. まあそれは
Indeed, about the SLBM launched from the nuclear submarine, do you take that as risk or not? It's up to interpretation. It is within the gray zone, whether the cyber attack in gray zone is risk or not a risk. But there is more that China can do. And therefore, on the east of Taiwan, their actions are becoming routine. And in the Western Pacific, military pressure is intensifying. And it might be a military activity, but it does not constitute military attack. Until how long can we call it below threshold? So if we do not call it attack, how long can we call it not reaching an attack? That is the diplomatic wisdom, and I think that's where Japan can play a significant role, and therefore the U.S. presence once again is recognized as important. Thank you.
Enlightening. Still one or two questions. Everyone satisfied? Great. So thank you very much for your and anything you would like to add? That would be your final remarks. If not, you've been so patient. So yes.
Me? Do I have anything to add? No, I think I basically said everything I have to say. Yeah, no, I mean certainly instability inside China is a major concern. There's no doubt. A collapse of the Chinese economy could certainly open the door to the need for an external adventure. My sense is that I think the Scarborough Shoal in the Philippines, the Chinese are experts at strategic deception. I think that is much more a likely place if they can't pull off the maneuver that Bill wants, well, you know, that Bill doesn't want, but that Bill described of internal pressure on China through a fifth column. But I think that's more likely where the scenario will be if Xi Jinping, he does go, I mean, he is risk averse, but when he sees an opportunity, he seizes it. Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Tibet, islands in the South China Sea, and that may be the place that he says, this one I can win, Taiwan I can't.
Yeah, and let me just say, I agree with Ken on that. I mean, if you were advising Xi Jinping, you would say, why don't you test where the red line is?
Yeah. Sorry.
But with the Philippines, you test where the red line is with the Philippines, where what does this particular administration, like the previous ones, how do they interpret the Mutual Defense Treaty? You test it, and I think that's right.
Great. Kubo sensei.
For Japan, China's economic power, and not only that, military power is overwhelmingly stronger. Under this backdrop, U.S. policy vis-à-vis Japan, the sense of alliance with Japan, it is rather unpredictable. So I think it is a serious crisis for Japan. However, it is not that there is no hope, because the U.S. has not gone away entirely. It is just that we have a certain degree of uncertainty and concern. The alliance between U.S. and Japan, how important important it is for the U.S. Using this forum and at all levels, we must engage in dialogue to convince U.S. about the importance of alliance with Japan. And Japan also has to make effort itself so that Japan can become an even more attractive ally for U.S., not dependent on everything. And making missile in Japan and providing to the U.S. or the U.S. Navy vessel, could that be built or repaired or maintained in Japanese ports and harbors? Such discussions are on the table, but in some way, Japan could increase the attractiveness as ally. So effort on the side of Japan, I think, is also necessary. So in a certain sense, Japan has become aware because of the Trump administration.
はい、最後に時間も限られてきているので簡単になんですが、日中関係について。
Well, the time is limited. So, Sino-Japanese relationship, this is not a topic of the session, so I didn't mention that much, but the economic pressure from China seems to be getting larger and larger, and they are more malicious, getting even more malicious. And Japan is trying to stabilize the situation, and the approach is being made, but we very much would like to have China approach to us. And that would be more balanced approach. That would be more positive for China, and Japan should create such a narrative. And for this, Japan should also improve on the deterrence power, working with the other countries, try to make China understand the reality. And we need a more diplomatic power to try to persuade China, and that is something needed for the bilateral relationship.
Really rich discussion, but from Japan's perspective, maybe I can say 2 or 3 things. So Eto mentioned to the idea of the sphere of powers in China, through Chinese policy, and this has a long prehistory. I mean, before the war, there are a lot of ideas like this. From Germany and Russia, Soviet Union, and Japan, and sometimes from China. And then that idea of international order eventually failed because there's always an issue of border that separates the spheres of powers. And that issue is insoluble because usually the leader, the hegemonic leader of each sphere of power tend to be arrogant. And then so they tend to be assertive. And also they are less eager to learn about the other spheres. And so have less knowledge to control the conflict about the border. But because of this, they have an aspiration. So there's a continuous effort to make this kind of arrangement. So I hope this will eventually fail, but it will take long until it fails. And Japan has to survive this period. And how we do this. And one thing is to make a good use of global. It's better than global west or global south. And it's eye-opening that the global is stabilizing forces. And so we should make use of that. We should embrace them to develop Japanese technology, etc. as well. And Japan has to do 2 things. One is to strengthen the alliance with the United States, and that's partly an adaptation to the idea of the sphere of power. And the second thing is to encourage free trade and other international law, other international norms and institutions to mitigate the impact of the sphere of power. So we have to adapt it as well as mitigate it. And we need to do this dual strategy. And to do this, it's always where the US is going is the most important and most difficult question. And it's easy to criticize Trump, maybe, but as Weinstein sensei powerfully demonstrated, there's a background that helped Trump emerge, and that's an anti-establishment sentiment that really exists in the US. So if you want to overcome or remove Trump out of your sight, you need to be better than Trump to address this issue. So first, so maybe 3 things. You need to be more strategic than Trump, and you need to really touch upon the society to solve the issues in the street. And the third, you need to be more coherent than Trump. Then you can think about that. And Japan is famous for its stability in domestic politics, but if Japan can serve as a model, stability in politics is one thing, but if we can achieve those three conditions, then Japan can be a even more attractive model that may inspire the world. So thank you very much for your great remarks. Thank you very much for your stimulating questions. And also I had a chance to check out the simultaneous translation. It works really well. So thank you very much, translators. Thank you for the film JIA. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the wonderful discussion.